I dated Marcus Delaney for 2 years and 3 months. And for the first 14 months of that relationship, I genuinely believed I had found the most stable, dependable man I'd ever been with. That belief is the thing I keep circling back to, honestly, more than the betrayal itself. The fact that the version of stability I fell for was, by design, built on a schedule so consistent it never once felt suspicious. I was 31 when we met, living in Asheville, North Carolina, working as a physical therapist at an outpatient clinic. Marcus was 36, worked as a regional account manager for a mid-sized industrial equipment company, and told me from our very first date that his territory covered a big chunk of the Southeast, which meant regular overnight travel. He said this up front, early, almost as a disclaimer, in a way that read to me at the time as admirable honesty, rather than what it actually was, which was laying the groundwork. His travel schedule was remarkably consistent. He'd leave every other Thursday evening and come back Sunday night, roughly twice a month, always framed as client visits, a distribution center in Knoxville, a manufacturing plant in Chattanooga, a trade show in Atlanta a few times a year. He always called every night he was gone, sometimes twice, always seemed a little tired and stressed in a believable, low-grade way, and always came home with some small gift, a candle from a boutique somewhere, a bottle of wine, once a genuinely beautiful scarf he said he'd found in a shop near his hotel in Knoxville. I want to be clear that nothing about this raised red flags for the first year and a half, because I had no reason to look for red flags. He was affectionate. He met my parents within the first 6 months and charmed them completely. My mother still, to this day, occasionally mentions how genuinely kind he seemed, which is its own strange kind of grief, watching people you love mourn a version of someone that never actually existed. He moved into my apartment after about a year together. We talked, in the vague, unforced way couples in their 30s do, about eventually buying a house, maybe getting married in the next couple of years. I was, by any reasonable measure, happy. The first crack showed up in a way so small I almost laughed it off entirely. It was a Tuesday evening, about 18 months in, and Marcus had asked me to grab his wallet from his jacket pocket so I could get his ID for a restaurant that was checking IDs at the door for a promotion, some kind of local trivia night thing. I opened his wallet, and tucked behind his driver's license was a grocery store loyalty card, not from our local Ingles or Publix, but from a regional chain called Foodland that I knew, vaguely, operated mostly out of eastern Tennessee, nowhere near Asheville. I didn't think anything of it in the moment beyond mild curiosity. I asked him about it, casually, over dinner. Something like, "Hey, why do you have a Foodland card? Isn't that a Tennessee thing?" He said, without any visible hesitation, that he'd signed up for it during a work trip because they had a promotion and he liked their store brand coffee and picked some up whenever he was passing through Knoxville. It was a completely plausible answer. I moved on. I want to stress how plausible it was because I think people who haven't been in a situation like this assume the lies must have been clumsy, and they weren't. Marcus was good at this in a way that still, honestly, disturbs me. The second crack came almost 4 months later, and this one I also explained away, though it sat with me longer. I was doing laundry and found a receipt in the pocket of a jacket he'd worn on his last trip, a Foodland receipt dated from that trip for a fairly substantial grocery order: milk, eggs, a rotisserie chicken, kids' cereal, specifically the cartoon character kind, juice boxes, and a large pack of diapers, size 4. I stood in my laundry room holding that receipt for a long time. When I asked him about it that night, he had an answer ready fast enough that, in hindsight, I think he'd rehearsed some version of this exact conversation, anticipating that someday I might find something. He said the receipt wasn't his, that he'd let a coworker with kids borrow his car for a grocery run during the trip because the coworker's car was in the shop, and the receipt must have ended up in his jacket pocket by accident when he grabbed something out of the glove box. I believed him. I want to say that plainly, without softening it, because I think it matters for understanding how something like this can go on for 2 years without the person on the receiving end being stupid or willfully blind. I believed him because the alternative explanation, that my boyfriend had an entire second household somewhere, complete with a toddler and an infant, was so far outside anything I could imagine about the person I thought I knew that my brain simply did not go there. It went to the more mundane, more plausible explanation every single time for over a year. The actual unraveling started on a Thursday in September, roughly 2 years and 1 month into the relationship, and it started because of something almost absurdly small: a flat tire. Marcus had left for one of his regular trips that morning, driving his own car as usual. Around 1 p.m., I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and a woman's voice, calm but clearly stressed, asked if she was speaking to Marcus's Jenna. I am not Jenna. My name is Alina. I told her she had the wrong person, and she apologized, said she must have grabbed the wrong number from his phone. She explained that Marcus had gotten a flat tire on the interstate near her exit, that she'd stopped to help him because she recognized his car, and that he'd asked her to call his emergency contact listed in his phone because his own phone was nearly dead. I asked her, with a calm I genuinely do not know how I produced in that moment, what she meant by recognized his car. She said, confused now herself, that of course she recognized it. It was parked outside her house most weekends. She said her name was Danielle. She said she'd been with Marcus for almost 6 years. She said they had 2 kids together, ages 4 and 1.5. The diapers, size 4, suddenly made horrifying sense, and that Marcus had told her for the entire duration of their relationship that his job required him to spend roughly half his time in Asheville managing a regional sales territory, where he kept a company apartment during the week. I told her I needed her to say all of that again, slower. We were both quiet on the phone for what felt like a very long time. What followed over the next several days was the two of us, 2 women who had never met, who had each spent years building a life with the same man on opposite sides of a 200-mile split, piecing together in real time over an increasingly surreal series of phone calls exactly how thoroughly and methodically Marcus had built 2 entirely separate lives. Danielle lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. She and Marcus had been together 6 years, married for 3 of them, legally married with a real marriage certificate I later saw a photo of, filed in Knox County. Their oldest child was 4. Their youngest was 18 months. Danielle worked part-time as a dental hygienist and believed completely that Marcus's job required him to spend his Asheville rotation roughly every other week managing accounts in western North Carolina, staying in a corporate apartment his company covered. I had, of course, believed the exact inverse, that his Tennessee territory required him to travel to Knoxville roughly every other week, staying in hotels. Marcus had constructed a schedule so precise that each woman's absence weeks were the other's presence weeks, almost perfectly alternating for over 2 years, the exact length of time I'd known him, though Danielle, obviously, had been his wife for years before I ever entered the picture. He'd essentially added me on top of an already existing marriage, running 2 full domestic lives on a 2-week rotating schedule, each of us fully unaware the other existed, each of us believing the travel excuse that explained the other's household. There is a version of this story where the reveal itself is the climax, and everything after is just cleanup. That was not my experience. The days after that phone call were, honestly, some of the strangest of my life, mostly because Danielle and I ended up almost against both our instincts, forming a kind of grim wartime alliance. We compared notes obsessively, dates he'd said he was in one city when the other of us had proof he'd been somewhere else entirely. There was, we eventually discovered, at least one 4-day stretch where his stories to both of us directly contradicted a business trip he'd separately told his actual employer he was taking, meaning at least some portion of his travel time was neither me nor Danielle nor work, a detail that still unsettles me because it means there may have been a third life or simply time he spent alone that neither of us ever accounted for. We compared gifts. The scarf he'd given me from a shop near my Knoxville hotel turned out to be from a boutique 2 blocks from Danielle's house, which she recognized instantly from the packaging. We compared, with a kind of grim, escalating disbelief, entire vacations. A trip he told me was a solo work conference in Nashville had, according to Danielle's calendar, coincided exactly with a family trip to Nashville she and Marcus and their kids had taken to visit her sister. The confrontation itself happened 4 days after that first phone call. Danielle and I decided together not to warn him. She arranged for him to come home on his normal Sunday night schedule, and I drove to Knoxville and was already sitting in her living room when he walked in the door. I will remember the look on his face for the rest of my life. It wasn't shock exactly. I think some deep, cornered part of him had always known this day was structurally inevitable, the way anyone running a scheme that requires this much sustained precision must know somewhere that a single flat tire could someday collapse the whole architecture. It was something closer to a kind of exhausted resignation, like watching a man finally set down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was possible to put it down. He didn't deny it. He didn't really try to explain it either, not in any way that made sense. He said at one point something about how he never meant for it to go this far, which is, I've since learned, an almost universal thing bigamists say, as though the scheme had somehow built itself around him rather than being something he actively constructed and maintained day by day, lie by lie, for years. What followed legally was more complicated than either of us initially expected. Danielle, as his legal wife, was the only one of us with any formal standing. She filed for divorce within the month, and because Tennessee, like most states, treats bigamy as a criminal offense, she also reported him to the local district attorney's office. I was not legally married to Marcus, which meant, painfully, that in the eyes of the law, what had happened to me, 2 years of deliberate, sustained deception, had no formal legal remedy beyond the criminal bigamy charge itself, which existed because of his marriage to Danielle, not because of his relationship with me. Marcus was ultimately charged with bigamy under Tennessee law, a Class C misdemeanor there, which even Danielle and I both found almost insultingly minor, given the scale of what he'd actually done. He pled guilty, received a fine and a short probation period, and this is the detail that still makes me angriest, more than a year later, never faced any charge, criminal or otherwise, for the 2 years he spent deliberately deceiving me, because deceiving an unmarried partner about the existence of your entire other family turns out to be, in any state I've since researched, not a crime at all. It's just devastating. Danielle and I stayed in occasional contact for a while after everything settled, in the strange, specific way that only makes sense to people who've been through something like this together. 2 women who will never really be friends in any normal sense, but who share something almost nobody else in either of our lives will ever fully understand. She eventually moved back near her own parents in Georgia with the kids. I moved to a new apartment across town from the one Marcus and I had shared, because I couldn't stand another night in a space that had been for 2 years one half of a life he was running on a schedule. I found out, secondhand, about 8 months after everything came apart, that Marcus had moved to a different city entirely, Birmingham, Alabama, and started a new job. I don't know if he's alone there. I genuinely don't know if I hope he is or isn't, which is its own strange thing to sit with. Some days I hope he's completely isolated, finally facing the consequences of building his entire adult life on a structure that could only ever be collapsed. Other days, more honestly, I think what I actually want is for whoever comes next, because I have to assume, given everything, that there will be a next, to somehow know what I didn't, fast enough to get out, before 2 years become a life. I still have the scarf. I don't wear it. I don't know why I haven't thrown it away yet, except that some part of me, I think, wants physical proof that at least one piece of what I thought I had was real, that even if the man giving it to me was living an elaborate lie, the fabric in my hands is, undeniably, exactly what it appears to be. I suppose that's a strange thing to need proof of 2 years and one betrayal later.